Welcome to the Coroner's Report, Episode 2 of Miss Maybelline, the Pied Piper, and a Clown Named Hobby. Please remember before we begin, this is a true crime podcast with adult themes. Please be aware, when possible, the actual person's voice is used in this podcast. However, several witnesses are deceased and some chose not to be recorded. Still others agreed for their words to be used, but not their real names. Please remember to like and follow us on all social media platforms. And don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. All suspects or persons of interest mentioned are considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law.
Your Honor, I'm Danny King, business manager for Mrs. Evelyn Williams. On the very night of May 21st, 1976, we arrived at the roller rink on a hunch, only to discover Derek and his minions carrying off everything belonging to the rink that they could get their hands on. That same night, while in a state of complete exhaustion, Mrs. Williams was urged by both Arkansas attorneys on the case to give Mr. Derek the sum of $45,000 and an Eldorado Cadillac to dissuade him from appealing. By the time I realized that was happening, I urged her to reconsider, so she settled for $10,000 and a Cadillac. I recall how in court you instructed the attorney and the sheriff to recover the sum of $15,000 that Mr. Derek indicated, somewhat reluctantly, he had hidden in his bathrobe under his car seat. Only $8,400 was recovered.
Welcome to the Coroner's Report. I'm Steve Dvorak, and I was the coroner in two of the largest counties in Arkansas and also served as the director of the state crime lab. These days I'm retired and reviewing some of the cases of the past that interested me. Along with my partners Carla Bozeman and Tracy Carrington, we are re-examining and sometimes even re-investigating old cases. Miss Maybelline is one of those. In our first episode, we introduced you to Evelyn Williams, one of the heiresses to the Maybelline fortune, and explained how a brief marriage to Hobby Derek brought her from California to a small town in Arkansas. Following her divorce, Evelyn promoted Danny King from hairdresser to general manager, and her skating rink is rebranded with a new name, the Spa City Roller Rink. Danny was tasked with protecting Evelyn from those who might want to steal from her, and he's still corresponding with the judge from Evelyn's divorce case. Quite simply, Evelyn was easy to manipulate and was a magnet for grifters. Sadly, Evelyn was no spring chicken, but her life would be cut short in 1978 by a house fire. But before we get to that, you have to understand all the characters at play, and man, oh man, were there some characters.
Danny knew exactly how to market the new business, and he quickly put Evelyn to work. Miss Maybelline was born. Never in her 50 years in the Williams family did she ever take advantage of the company name. But Danny knew this little bit of her past would wow the residents of Arkansas. As for Evelyn, she appeared to revel in her newfound fame, and she really did like her new town. Or at least she said so when she spoke to a local reporter.
I find the Arkansas hills are full of a peace and tranquility that I thought gone from the present rushing pace of our times. Yet there's an energy here too, an energy from the young people that fascinates me. A creative, dynamic force that will be felt throughout the state within the next 5 years.
Danny was always right by her side, protecting her and promoting her business, even with the local, hardcore, conservative chancery judge.
Evelyn's divorce was final, but the local chancery judge took it upon himself to write to Evelyn, encouraging her, for the sake of the community and her business, to go ahead and pay off debt that might have been run up by her ex-husband, Hobby Derek. The hairdresser, wig-maker turned business manager, Danny King, replied to the judge in writing on Evelyn's behalf. And those letters were tucked away in the divorce file in the Garland County Courthouse all these years later.
Mrs. Williams has attempted to facelift the business and add extra recreational facilities on her property to enhance the tourist revenue, employment situation, and goodwill for Hot Springs. Perhaps you've read the article in the paper. May I state that she did not have to remain in Hot Springs, but she loves the city and the citizens, and professional people have given her so much support that she decided to stay and make her home here, and her property a huge recreational facility.
But it wasn't all a bed of roses. After her death, not all the news reports were kind. I do remember Danny and Evelyn driving up and down Central Avenue in a convertible Cadillac. It had a M on the door like a monogram. Both of them would be wearing mink coats. They were quite the show. You know, she was really good looking, real pretty and always well dressed, but she was skinny as a tick on a light pole.
As mysterious as Evelyn's death was, it was no more so than her life. Having married into the Maybelline cosmetics fortune, Evelyn did not have more money than she knew what to do with. She knew exactly what to do with it. She sported around town in a large Cadillac with her initial flauntingly engraved on the doors, and she wore fashions too hot for women decades younger. Evelyn was ripe material for cocktail party discussions and the society pages, and not all that gossip was favorable.
According to Danny, in a letter to Judge Chestnut, a very conservative Judge Chestnut, Hobby continued a campaign to terrorize Evelyn.
Evelyn has suffered supreme harassment by Hobby Derrick and Delisle Compton. Youth with questionable criminal records have, under instructions from Mrs. Compton, harassed and agitated Mrs. Williams in an attempt, and I quote, to bring her to a nervous breakdown state in order to cause her to leave town so that Mrs. Compton and Mr. Derrick can get control of the roller rink, and I quote, to bring her to a nervous breakdown state in order to cause her to leave town so that Mrs. Compton and Mr. Derrick can get control of the roller rink. Failing this, Compton and Derrick have stated they intend to build another rink in Hot Springs, money being no object, they say. Mrs. Williams has had obscene words spray-painted all over her automobile. Derrick has been seen several times prowling on and around the property, forcing us to continue our security guard night and day at a huge additional expense, and threatening phone calls have been made to our employees, one in particular by Mrs. Compton. So you see what we've been up against.
Oddly, none of these events could be substantiated in either the police files or the courthouse records or in the local newspaper from the time. In the Arkansas State Police file, when they investigated the fire, the owner of the local security firm hired to guard Evelyn night and day disputed Danny's allegations.
My name is Rick Wilson, and Chuck Mahoney and I own Imperial Investigations and Security. Myself and Chuck Mahoney and Irvin Johnson worked for Mrs. Williams as security guards on a round-the-clock basis for approximately 9 to 10 weeks. The whole time I was there was never any threats or even a wrong number. Danny told me on several occasions about threats and other things that a man named Sam Salim had made.
Sam Salim was described by Evelyn's family as a Cajun hooligan hired by Evelyn's divorce attorney to provide security from harassment by Hobby. Salim even told Evelyn he had an uncle in the mafia. This may be where the rumors of the Dixie Mafia originated. Salim allegedly attempted to extort money from Evelyn to pay off his reported gambling debts. Salim was fired even before the divorce was final. Danny then hired Rick Wilson's firm to provide 24-hour, 7-day-a-week security. We tracked down Sam Salim and found he was living in Natchitoches, Louisiana. He didn't appear to be any sort of hitman or have any ties to the Dixie Mafia. But it's not like that's the sort of thing you advertise in the paper. There's not a record, however, in the courthouse, police file, or newspapers linking Sam Salim to Evelyn.
By this time, Evelyn has relinquished full financial control over to Danny King, and he didn't miss a beat. There's evidence in the divorce file that Evelyn was kept in the dark by Danny King. The very one who was supposed to be her friend and looking out for her was not telling her everything.
Evelyn was very disturbed and confused as I have attempted to take the load of business off of her due to her present health, and she knew nothing of these matters concerning creditors. As a woman accustomed to paying her bills for years, she was at a loss to understand the nature of your letter. In short, My neck was sticking out because I didn't want to worry her with the tremendous red tape involved. It is essential during this time that she rests and relaxes.
Even some of the teens that were around back then noticed issues early on at the skating rink, and they remember them today. Debbie was just a teenager and noticed that Danny liked misinformation.
Danny liked to spread misinformation. That's one of his favorite things to do. He would tell people things even at the skating rink. He would tell them these crazy things, and none of them would be true. And people would come back and say, "But you told me." He would say, "It's so loud in here you just didn't understand what I was telling you." Bullshit. That's what I think.
Soon Evelyn went off to have a facelift and a breast augmentation at the same time. She was 76 and became the Maybelline Queen. In Arkansas, she could be a superstar. Now just remember, this is a mystery, and the cock may crow, but it's the hen who lays an egg. One teenager at the skating rink didn't realize her connection with the Maybelline family, but everyone else in town did.
See, I thought Maybelline was just her nickname because she was always dressed to the T. I mean, the makeup, the clothes. I thought that was all because of the way she looked. I didn't know she had anything to do with the makeup company Maybelline. I didn't know that.
Soon, she became almost like royalty in this small Arkansas town.
She would go to the snack bar, and all the kids would come around her, and she wouldn't leave. They would be hugging on her and all. She wouldn't leave unless she went into the office.
I grew up in Hot Springs, and I wasn't at the skating rink very often, but I do vividly remember seeing her as a kid. I thought she was a real queen, and I do remember Danny because he looked like my older brother. To a small town kid, it's easy to see how so many got caught up in the glamour. Angie Sheets was just a 16, 17-year-old kid when she met 34-year-old Danny King.
Well, Danny, of course, was so gorgeous, and he seemed to single me out, and I could not understand why this gorgeous man would even want to look my way. So he roller skated with me, and he said I reminded him of his sister.
In December of 76, Evelyn revises her will. No one is really privy to the details at the time, but in less than 2 years, that information will shock everyone.
Well, maybe not everyone is in the dark. While the bulk of her estate remains with her family, she writes her new best friend Danny into the will. Danny's only been in town for a couple of months.
It will all soon come to light, but the mystery we have to solve is still ahead, still stewing in the pot like a chicken, and you know with time most mysteries are solvable.
Well, Steve, you know, sins, like chicken, they all come home to roost eventually.
I see what you did there. The dynamic between Danny and Evelyn was interesting. He lived at her home in the basement apartment, but she was afraid of how locals in this small southern town in the Bible Belt might react. Even though she could have been Danny's grandmother, she soon started calling him her nephew. But even some of the teenagers around at the time knew there was something odd about this relationship.
We never quite got how it worked, but there wasn't like any sort of romantic relationship between the two of them, even though they could talk a little bit like they were an old married couple, but they was very obvious they weren't. He was there for the money. He was throwing around figures and money and just being flamboyant and living that Hollywood lifestyle sort of thing. You know, to be honest, my perceptions of Ms. Williams were really very limited. And every time I saw her, she seemed kind of out of it and like crazy, eccentric little old lady with a lot of money. To see her hanging around with Danny, like I said, it was all a Hotel California picture.
And Danny was having a blast. Managing Miss Maybelline and the skating rink wasn't quite enough, so soon he stepped in to help promote a rock band named Kids. Dan Clinton was around back then as a crew member to the band.
There was the power trio, and they had more crew than they had band. That era of the band was pretty much mostly Danny, and Danny was puffing them up and going to make them huge. While in hindsight, for somebody like me who spent most of my adult life playing in bands, that's like, you know, big red flag. But at that time, somebody telling you he's going to make you guys big stars, you're going to have a big record contract, blah, 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 that's real easy to buy into. It's seriously easy for those guys to buy into. It came out of Danny. He was really blowing things up. We're going to go to L.A. and record, blah, 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 and all this stuff. And, you know, these guys were a cover band.
It If you like the Coroner's Report and the programming we're providing, please remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so we can keep providing quality programming. Like and subscribe today.
The band played only a handful of gigs around Hot Springs, but band members and their friends had open-door access to the Maybelline Manor. The band set up in an empty room in the 18-room house and practiced almost daily, and band members and their friends were constantly in and out of the house, which was odd because if you remember, Danny had told Evelyn that the Dixie Mafia and or her ex-husband were out to get her. Yet these rock and rollers were running in and out of the house all day and all night.
I was 17. Whenever I'd see anybody around him that looked like they were part of the house, it looked like a scene from Hotel California. I mean, it was just buff tan guys. There were never any girls around, which was kind of disappointing from my perspective. But at the time, rock bands were not necessarily all that big a deal because disco was just overriding everything. But, I would have thought, there would have been a lot more girls hanging around.
While the relationship Danny had with Evelyn may have raised some questions, I suspect his homosexuality made tongues wag with the evangelicals. Danny was gay, and it took small-town Hot Springs kind of by storm. But not everyone appreciated his flamboyant behavior in the Bible Belt. Sometimes it was better to leave things unsaid, at least according to Debbie.
You got to remember, this was the 1970s in Redneck, Arkansas. Homosexuality was not discussed or approved of.
Even Dan Clinton, one of the teenagers working as a crew member for the band Kids, noticed how different Danny King acted.
It was, at the time, he was never blatantly out, and nobody I knew was blatantly just flat out, yes, I'm gay. Screw you, whatever. It was more rumor than anything about him being gay. But he had that arrogance and the attitude that was just, I know for me at the time, it was surreal. It was like seeing Studio 54 just walk into the room. And it wasn't so much that he was gay that was creepy, it was the Studio 54 attitude. Real creepy.
But again, you're talking about a gay man from California moving to the buckle of the Bible Belt in the 1970s. Could this have caused all the rumor and gossip surrounding Evelyn's death and surrounding Danny? Angie Sheets, who was a teenager back then, certainly believes so.
Absolutely. For some reason, that seemed to make him the villain. It was like they had to have a villain and he had to be it. I think that played a lot into it because at that time, just coming from the North, I can understand prejudice against somebody different. And Diana and Miss Williams, they were different. So that put them at odds with the community right off the bat.
Old Danny, he could sure be a charmer.
Here comes Danae. He was like a goddess. I mean, the first night we met, I was on overalls and no shirt. It was just beautiful.
Of course, not all the teenage girls at the time felt the same. Debbie, who worked at the skating rink as a teenager, strongly disagrees.
Later on, it dawned on me when I went to that skating rink and I saw how Danny was operating. And he started that crap about, oh, you're so beautiful, I just can't look at you. I thought, uh-oh, this is a perv. This is a weirdo. I thought to myself, I don't know why he's looking at me because he's as queer as a $3 bill. It wasn't that he was gay. He was just a perv. He was a weirdo.
In his spare time, Danny flocked to the newest bar in town. It had been the Peacock Lounge, but was quickly becoming Norma Christie's, an iconic gay bar owned by Miss Gay America Norman Jones.
Right then, we were doing really, really good. We were the first discotheque or dance club to open on Central Avenue. We were bringing in lots of people. Danny was a customer. He came in. He swirled in one night. He really did. He swirled in one night. He wore a different mink every time he came. And with no shirt. Didn't have a shirt on. And he would always come in. And he would sling his coat over to I used to have a coat check lounge. He'd sling it over to the girls, say, watch this mink. Don't let anybody touch it. I don't know. He just didn't make a lot of friends with anybody because he was such a witch.
Norman Jones was quite the character. He was a former Navy man and ran a tight ship as he still does today. His clubs are known as clean clubs. There's no drug dealing or underage kids in his discotheques.
Every night he'd bring in a bag full of money and he'd put it behind the bar. And I said, what's in the bag, bitch? And he said, that's my tape from the night. And I was afraid he had drugs in there. And so, I was real particular about who I let put stuff behind my bar. And I always look in the bag. And sure enough, it was stuff full of money. So he was getting money from somewhere, because every drink that he would drink, he would pay for it with $100 bills. And that's all he ever carried was $100 bills. So obviously his roller rink was doing very good, because he always had a shitload of money in that bag. I never went out there myself. He invited me out there several times, but I just didn't have a good feeling about it. And I just said, whenever I have time, and I always was putting him off, because I just didn't want to get involved in anything that he was in.
Ironically, one of the teenage boys at the skating rink, Mark Lawrence, tells a similar story after all these years.
I worked for Evelyn at the rink. Danny was the manager. I know for a fact Danny would take the money bag. He would take all the cash downtown to a gay bar called Norma Christie. He would leave the money in the vet or whatever car he was in. At one time, he told Evelyn he got robbed. They broke into the car and took the money. She was trying to take over Hot Springs. It ain't got shit to do with Danny. Danny ain't got no power. Evelyn had the power. Danny was stealing from her big time. I saw the damn bank bags. You know the size of a bank bag. That son of a bitch would be wider than shit, and you couldn't pack no more money in it. And I'd see him put it underneath the driver's seat, whether it was the vet or the El Dorado.
Reportedly, by March of 1977, only a few months after her will was changed and a year before she was to die in the inferno in her home, Miss Maybelline was wising up to Danny's antics. In the police report, 22-year-old Janet, who was working at Arkansas Bank and Trust at the time, revealed there was an issue.
Danny King had the authority to write checks on Mrs. Williams' account until March of 1977, when the bank's auditor complained of the manner in which King was handling the business, and his authority to write checks on Mrs. Williams was revoked.
Rumors ran rampant through the town about Miss Maybelline and her flamboyant escort. While Hot Springs is a tourist town, and it's made its way for 100 years or so, shaking down visitors, at its core, Hot Springs is still really a small town. Janet raised many concerns when questioned by the state police about the fire.
I would say Danny is definitely a pathological liar. He's always having a bunch of young boys around him, stating that he's trying to help them seek employment and do recreational functions to keep them off the street. However, I know that he had a goon squad who would do his dirty work for him, such as breaking and entering and stealing and so forth.
She named those teenage boys on the goon squad, and we were able to easily track their crimes through both the newspaper and the court system. But there was more. There's always more.
63-year-old Debbie was a 17-year-old kid working at the skating rink back then.
Most of the guys at the rink come from troubled homes and were poor. Mark Lawrence was one of the boys that King was blackmailing. King had some photos of Mark in the situation that he could not let his parents know about, and King would hold over his head. There was another late teenager. I never could believe that this boy fell for Danny because that boy came from good, solid, pretty wealthy family. The only thing I could think was that Danny wanted the boy because he thought he might get some money out of him by blackmailing the parents to keep that kind of thing downwind. I got away from the skating rink for my own self-preservation.
None of the then teenage boys, now who are men in their 60s, that we spoke to, admitted to any sort of abuse or blackmail. However, very few of the men we spoke to remember their experience with Danny favorably. But Danny, now an 82-year-old man looking back fondly on his time in Hot Springs, remembers things very, very differently. He related his optimistic view to us in this Facebook chat.
Hot Springs then was fun, open as more and more young people became curious about themselves. And I was Danny King, the Pied Piper, elevating the poor trailer park kids. I mentored so many then. This last year, several reached out to me, now middle-aged, telling me how in awe they were then because I was so bold, could seem to do anything against all odds.
Did we mention Hot Springs was a small town and gossip is an art form? Norman Jones, the club owner, was concerned with what he was seeing at the time. Remember, Norman was known for running a clean club. He knew the cops were watching him closely, and he wasn't about to lose his liquor license serving underage kids or by running drugs through his club.
People were falling for it because anytime that you have someone doing that, going around singing, they're going to follow you wherever you're going. And he would always bring younger people in with him. And I'd say they can't be in here, then I had to turn them away. And I had no qualms in turning them away because sometimes he brought some very, very young people in there. And so you're going to miss out on all this money if you don't let them in. Well, I'll just have to. He brought in so many that were pay for pay. He never tried to sell any drugs to me because he knew that I was not into that shit.
We do know that 17-year-old Angie Sheets was introduced to Hot Springs nightlife by Danny.
Danny took me there. He took me to my first gay club. Well, my only gay club, I believe. Yes, it was downtown. And then we went to one of the strip clubs that was showy, kind of Las Vegas style. And we just had a ball. I don't know if I'm supposed to tell that or not.
I'm thinking Norman Jones and the strip club owner wouldn't have been too happy that an underage 17-year-old girl was in either establishment with a 34-year-old man. Still, drug rumors persisted. Even the young people from the skating rink knew about the drugs.
Also, he's been getting some drugs through the mail from California that he sniffs in his nose. The name is amyl nitrate. I understand this has something to do with their erections during sex.
It wasn't just the kids that knew. Even Rick Wilson, the owner of the security company hired by Danny, related what he saw to the police after the fire.
On one occasion, Chuck found an ampule of some type of narcotic liquid in the freezer downstairs, and Danny told him a friend of his from California was mailing it to him and told him in essence if he did not like it, he could simply get out. It was at that time that I quit. I suspect that Danny King was writing my checks instead of Mrs. Williams, so approximately 3 or 4 weeks after I started to work, I started keeping detailed notes and copies of all of my checks.
The oddest part to me is the protection from the security firm. If you recall, Rick Wilson said there was never anything that made him think Miss Maybelline was ever in any danger by the Dixie Mafia, her ex-husband Hobby, or anyone else for that matter. Yet even the kids had heard stories.
Danny told me one time that someone had to stay with Evelyn Williams at all times, that she was never left alone. She was afraid there for a while that her ex-husband would try to kill her. He lives in Fayetteville now. His name is Hobby Derrick. Derrick's ex-wife was Delisle Compton. She's residing in Fayetteville also at this time, as far as I know. She was a lot younger than Derrick. In fact, she was instrumental in introducing Derrick to Evelyn Williams.
But there's no police report. There's nothing in the paper. And there's nothing in the court records of Hobby Derrick or Delisle Compton ever reaching back out to Evelyn. In fact, by this time, Hobby and Delisle had moved far away from Hot Springs and were living in Fayetteville.
And if she was in so much danger, why didn't they keep the kids out of the house and keep the damn doors locked? Rick Wilson and Chuck Mahoney knew security, and that would have been the very first protocol to take if someone was in danger.
Even Mark Lawrence, who was a teenager at the time, thinks back and remembers the lack of security.
There was a lot of people in that house. Come and go as you want. And Evelyn didn't know shit.
1977 was a fun year for Evelyn. She was Miss Maybelline, and she was seen sporting around Hot Springs in that Cadillac with her blonde wig and Danny along for the ride. She and Danny produced Arkansas's first roller capades and aptly named it Hollywood on Wheels. They brought in talent from the West Coast. Of course, most people didn't realize the headliner was Evelyn's own granddaughter. They were hosting fundraisers for local charities. Evelyn herself, always impeccably dressed and coiffed, appeared on the Easter Seals telethon broadcast statewide. They were everywhere and featured often in the newspapers.
The chicken was out of the henhouse, and in May, Danny King was cited for contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Less than a week later, the kids' band is playing at the local community college, and there's a break-in at the roller rink.
In October of 1977, 5 months before the fire, Danny brings his live-in lover, Steve Wyatt, to the local dentist for 12 new crowns. Now, remember, Miss Maybelline has financially supported Danny throughout his time in Hot Springs, but this would be the beginning of the end.
In December of 77, the skating rink closed with little to no notice. Danny had convinced Evelyn that they could convert the bare-bones skating rink into a glorious dinner theater and draw in all the big-name stars.
I mean, all it would take is a little money. Quickly, a corporation was created named Evdan, a bit of Evelyn and a bit of Danny. Danny King also had a little housekeeping to do. See, his real name was Harry Daniel Alkire, and he had never officially changed it. But because of the legality, he did officially change his name to Danny King. And it wouldn't be the last time he would reinvent himself. We asked Norman Jones about Danny's plans for the dinner theater.
Well, he was just going to open a big club over there and just shut everybody down. And he was going to bring in all these people from California and all that and do his sound and lighting and all that stuff. He said, I just did the roller rink because it was something to do. And he said, so, now I've raised enough money. What he was doing was to take over Hot Springs, with his business. Man, as I was moving to Little Rock, I didn't give a damn. As long as I got the money, I knew that whenever he'd come in, I better have plenty of change on hand because he'd just go around giving money to people. And then he'd buy this table drinks and that table drinks. It always felt like he was doing that to make everybody feel better about him because he was such a stuck-up fart.
Danny says he did a lot of improvements on the roller rink, turning it into the Palace Dinner Theater. Of course, fine feathers don't mean that you can fly. He says he spent $300,000 on the renovation, yet even today there's no drop ceiling in the building. It's just a metal building with insulation tucked in the roof like a barn. That $300,000, well, that would be like $1.4 million in today's money. Now you have to remember this is a mystery, so where did all that damn money go if it didn't go into the dinner theater? Danny talks about buying used chandeliers for the club from the locals and other things, and ironically, some of those chandeliers still hang proudly in what once was the dinner theater, but is now a strip club.
Did you do a little on-site research, Steve?
Hey, you just leave that chapter out of this book, sister friend. Even old Norman Jones raised an eyebrow on the proposed cost.
For $400,000 back then, you could have changed the world.
By this point, February 1978, Danny's world is falling apart. Evelyn has limited his ability to write checks, and he's struggling to get by on his $400 a week salary. So he doesn't have the money to pay the dentist for the caps on Steve Wyatt's teeth, and Evelyn isn't paying. The dentist files suit for $2,400.
I suppose he let his mouth write a check that his ass couldn't cash.
Do you have like a little book over there of one-liners?
No, I'm just remembering back to the days of Evelyn and Danny when they were in their heyday and how a lot of the country folk talked back then.
Less than a month before the fire, Evelyn is stuck. She has little choice but to continue the renovations and to open the dinner theater. The opening is pre-planned and set in stone. Even though those renovations only started a month ago, Danny has already booked country music sensation Conway Twitty for opening night March 1st. The opening night coincided with the race meet. As we've told you before, Hot Springs is a little different from most towns in Arkansas. The thoroughbred horse track brings tourists to town during the race meet, and local businesses live and breathe for that extra revenue. 1978 just happened to be a banner year for the track. Over 1 million people came to watch the ponies run over the season, and the daily average handle hit $2 million that year.
There was always money to be made by someone at the track, but usually it wasn't the folks placing the bets. Tracy, I bet you don't remember because you're too young, but there used to be a parade every day, twice a day, during the race meet when they'd bring the money in a armored car with police escorts, like 10 or 15 police cars and motorcycles, and they would run full out from downtown to the track, go in the basement of the track, take the money out, they'd take the money into the track, and then in the afternoon, the process was repeated. It was a huge spectacle in Hot Springs. It was like you got a parade every day with speeding police cars. It was really fun.
Hey, I certainly remember those lights and sirens running hot down Central. My mother worked in one of the main money rooms there, and it was always hysterical. She would bring home pictures of her standing in front of millions of dollars. Dad and I would be waiting outside to pick her up because traffic was always so bad she wanted to be picked up instead of having to fight it on the way home. And I do remember the palace opening. Evelyn was focused on one thing, getting the Palace Dinner Theater up and running. Evelyn was involved in the renovations, but nothing was going as planned, and 2 bombs were quietly waiting to explode. First, Evelyn found a letter in the office written by Danny to a young man from the roller rink. The letter left no doubt Danny was wanting to turn the palace into a gay establishment. She feared that would tarnish the Maybelline name and her own reputation forever. Let's remember, this was 1978 in a small town in Arkansas. Evelyn had little choice but to continue to the opening and then end her business relationship with Danny.
But only a few weeks later, late one night, Evelyn heard loud music coming from Danny's downstairs apartment. She went to his living area and was reportedly greeted by a group of naked young men who were allegedly drinking, doing drugs, and taking photos of one another. Evelyn was upset and told Danny she was taking him out of the will and ending their partnership. Evelyn often threatened to take people out of her will, so it's not known how seriously Danny took the news, especially since this was just days before the opening of the theater. Evelyn realizes she's in trouble, and she thought she has been had yet again by someone she trusted. Miss Maybelline swallows her pride and writes a letter to her son, Bill.
Dear son, honey, I want you to know how sorry I am for not following your advice and getting rid of Danny sooner. I know now that what you were talking about as far as him having motives opposite of mine concerning the palace, I have found out things that would make your hair stand on end, and because of that, I plan to cut him out of my will as soon as the palace opens and dissolve my partnership with him in the Ebdan Corporation. I hope this makes you happy because all I care about is your happiness. Also, darling, as you requested, I have authorized Joe Lewis to make you the sole executor of my estate when I die, which I hope won't be for a very long time. These are the times we realize we love someone. Thank God. That's all I can say. All my love.
The incredible Miss Maybelline, Evelyn Williams, would be dead within a month. The real mystery simply boils down to, was the fire arson or was it an accident?
This concludes episode 2 of Miss Maybelline, the Pied Piper, and a Clown Named Hobby. There's so much more to learn, so like and subscribe if you don't want to miss out. Our team is looking for answers. If you have information you'd like to share, please reach out to us on our website at thecoronersreport.net or on any social media platform. This case can still be solved, but we need your help. Thanks goes out to all who made this podcast possible, including Evelyn's granddaughter, Sherry Williams, who sat for hours of interviews and provided us the voice for her grandmother's words. We'd also like to thank Angie Sheets, Danny Clinton, and Norman Jones for allowing us to interview and record their memories. Special thanks goes to voice actors Riley Seaman, J.D. West, Doug Kreil, Diane Jones, Jeff Griffin, and Carla Bozeman. Additional information about this story may be found in the following books: The Maybelline Story and the Spirited Family Dynasty Behind It, written by Evelyn's granddaughter, Sherry Williams, and The Maybelline Prince, written by Danae Montague King.